Our next speaker, also very excellent, Danny Haiphong. Danny is a contributing editor to Black Agenda Report. He's also a co-coordinator of the BAP Supporter Network and an organizer for the No Cold War campaign. Danny?
Thank you so much for having me, and I want to extend my solidarity to all of those who have participated in the panel, as well as all of those who are watching. The instability of Trump's presidency and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement have upset the US power structure. White supremacist groups such as the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo movement have increased in number and visibility to protect the right of white America to the historic spoils of stolen land and stolen labor. These groups have found their great white hope in Donald Trump in his many appeals to keep them safe from Black Americans, immigrants, and oppressed nations all over the world. Equally troubling has been the massive counterinsurgency campaign to smother the movement against racism in its crib. The US crusade against Black Lives Matter is enabled by the very forces supposedly monitoring the white nationalist organizations and groups in the United States. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, for example, has been praised for protecting Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer from a white terrorist plot. Yet the FBI was a leading force in the repression of Black freedom fighters such as Marcus Garvey and Claudia Jones, as well as Black freedom organizations such as the Black Panther Party. Beginning in 2014, the FBI monitored activists in Ferguson and would later target them as quote-unquote Black identity extremists. Fertile ground was thus laid for a surge in white nationalism embodied by Donald Trump. The enablers of white nationalism are numerous within the halls of power. Police officers are top recruits of white nationalist organizations. The US military has stoked Trump's anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant racism by destabilizing the planet with endless war. Trump is a member of the same class of corporate thieves that called Black Americans quote-unquote mud people, as they were sold quote-unquote ghetto loans by banks like Wells Fargo in the lead up to the economic collapse of 2008. Trump's quote-unquote shithole country comment was made possible by the Western world's continued plunder of the African continent. Racism is a necessary precondition for keeping the United States at the top of a global capitalist order built on centuries of colonialism, genocide, and slavery. Activists from around the world express solidarity with Black Lives Matter for this very reason. The key word is global. Racism is a global ideology in a global system of oppression. A massive wave of anti-China sentiment has swept across the US and its allies in the Western world to expose both the global character of racism and the dire need for international solidarity. Anti-China and anti-Asian racism are nothing new here in the United States. The brutal US invasion of the Philippines more than a century ago, the US's internment of Japanese residents during World War II, and the genocidal wars in Korea and Vietnam all possessed racist justifications. Anti-China racism intensified in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic as the US and its allies moved quickly to blame their ills on China. Trump has repeatedly called COVID-19 the quote-unquote China virus to cover up for his role in the deaths of over 200,000 people. Sanctions have been leveled against Chinese officials and tech companies. Chinese college students have been targeted as potential communist insurgents and forced to transfer from school or return to China. The US's pivot to Asia has accelerated under Trump. His administration is now trying to rally Japan, India, and other countries in the region to join the military encirclement of China. And these are just some of the policies that have soured US-China relations and threatened the safety of Chinese and Asian American communities living right here in the United States. Anti-China and anti-Black racism are intimately connected. The same US political and economic elite waging a multifaceted assault on Black Lives Matter has blamed China for everything from the pandemic to the economic crisis. Black Lives Matter is the internal enemy, while China is considered the most dangerous foe to US hegemony. A similar dynamic occurred during the First Cold War. The US desperately wanted to hide its Jim Crow terrorism from international eyes, yet relied upon white supremacist organizations such as the John Birch Society to demonize the Black freedom movement as a Soviet plot. Racism is just as antithetical to human progress now as it was then. Police accountability is antagonistic to the interests of the wealthy, who see the police as their loyal protectors. China's enormous economy and global leadership on the problems of poverty, climate change, and COVID-19 threatens the interests of a society dependent upon military force to maintain hegemony status. Say their name has become an increasingly popular means of reifying and reinforcing the humanity of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the many Black Americans killed each year by the police. Let Black Lives Matter be the first step in building a global movement that says racism's name and fights it with solidarity. Racism lies at the root of the two biggest questions confronting humanity: whether to support Black Lives Matter and oppose US-led escalations toward China, which have deepened anti-China antipathy. The answer appears easy, but the path forward is difficult. Full solidarity must be given to Black Lives Matter. Anti-China racism must be rejected without hesitation. How we express and act on these principles should be the only thing up for debate. Thank you.
And thank you, Danny. Absolutely brilliant. Solidarity, fantastic words.